Hi everyone, you're listening to the Blockchain Socialist podcast, and for today's interview I have Rhea Myers. She's an artist, hacker, and writer originally from the UK and now based in Canada. Her work places technology and culture in mutual interrogation to produce new ways of seeing the world as it unfolds around us. And she's been involved in the blockchain art world probably for as long as it has existed, and has had her art recently featured in Sotheby's first NFT auction sale. So hi Rhea, how you doing?
Hi, I'm good, thank you. How are you?
I'm doing pretty good. Yeah, thanks for coming on. So yeah, there are so many different places that I could start with this interview because you've done a lot of really, really interesting work, a lot of interesting writing, a lot of course, very interesting artistic stuff, and congratulations on getting featured in Sotheby's. So maybe as just a place to start, I can ask if you could give us maybe a bit of an introduction and how you were first interested in blockchain and Bitcoin really in the very beginning, and what were your thoughts sort of during that time?
Sure. So I found out about Bitcoin from the Peer-to-Peer Foundation. I've got like an entry on my old blog saying, hey, this looks interesting. And then I didn't think anything about it for a while. And then sort of like lots of people, I'm sure, I downloaded the Bitcoin software, tried to mine. This is way past when you could mine with CPUs, so that didn't work out. And so again, I lost interest. And then sort of when it was getting more attention, I bought some, I think it was about 50 pounds per coin at the time. No, 25 pounds per coin at the time. So like that's relatively late, and started trying to construct my own transactions. And I think I lost all of it because I misunderstood how transactions worked and didn't provide a change address. So yeah, my first encounters with it was sort of a bit of a disaster, but by 2011, I did a blog post saying, the world's first Bitcoin artist, I will draw you a Bitcoin for a Bitcoin. And one person actually got in touch with me and said, how do we do this? And I was very worried because I thought, oh no, what if the price of Bitcoin goes down and it won't pay for the postage on it or something? So I actually didn't follow up on that. So yeah, I could have had at least one more Bitcoin. So that's sort of $50,000 currently that I gave up on for fear of not being able to make postage. And like from an artistic point of view, CoinFest in Vancouver in 2014 was great. Eric Zepka curated a show of digital art around sort of currency themes there. And so that really, really drove home to me that there was a community there, that there were some people who sort of really, really truly believed that sort of Dogecoin was the future, and sort of people who saw this as a continuation of community currencies, you know, like Let's and that kind of thing, and that there were sort of businesses sniffing around the edges at that time. So that was sort of a moment that really crystallized things for me, and I encountered the people from Decontrol, Vancouver's crypto hacker space there, and sort of started hanging out in that space and just sort of seeing what people were doing with crypto, seeing how people were thinking about it, and starting to see sort of both some of the strengths of this idea of a currency that you know, the government or other people couldn't interfere in, and starting to see some of the contradictions between sort of this idealism and people who were hoping to get rich off of it, and people who believed in sort of freedom from government censorship for money, but seemed curiously relaxed about other things being interfered in.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. So at the time, what I noticed about like your early writings is none of it was like very like idealistic or like very like you definitely weren't into the libertarian hype. That's for sure.
Yeah, as I mean, I sort of, I had libertarian antibodies from being extremely online. So, libertarianism, and sort of for any libertarians listening, I love you. You know, your focus on freedom and personal responsibility and robust individualism is completely wonderful. As with any political position at all, there are contradictions to libertarianism, and sort of, yeah, I eventually dug into this in the essay in Artists Rethinking the Blockchain, which is called Blockchain Poetics, and yeah, for the kind of libertarianism that Bitcoin instantiates, the desire to have, I guess, private property, the commodity form, without the state to maintain it, leaves the question hanging. And Bitcoin certainly is one answer to that question. But once you go off chain, the questions start to cascade. And yeah, so I'm sort of, I described myself for a while as a left libertarian, because I do sort of, I do feel that personal freedom, in however you conceive of that, is very important. But sort of, I don't feel that freedom is best secured by sort of protecting your own particular potato patch with as many firearms as you can purchase. But yeah, so I sort of cautiously inspired by the enthusiasm of the libertarian spirit, and by its success in sort of creating something that worked in technology with Bitcoin. But yeah, I didn't get swept up in it.
Yeah. And yeah, just to mention, because you mentioned the book Artists Rethinking the Blockchain. I think I've had that book mentioned like at least 3 times on this podcast as like recommendations for people to check out, and I think you were one of the main authors of it.
Yeah, I've got a couple of pieces in there. I've got the essay Blockchain Poetics, which is very much it's a crash course in the ideology and resonances and imaginary of the blockchain circa, is it 2018? I can't remember when it was now. So yeah, it's a snapshot, and it's sort of very much trying to explain to the assumed European left-wing art world reader that digital cash is not simply fascism that you can ignore and run away from and feel very secure in doing so. That there's an imaginary here. There's something that, whether it works or not, touches onto the current state of the world, and that there are possibly useful tools here to take and dit on and turn into something useful. And sort of my experience of that was, I sort of shouted this from the rooftop for several years. People ignored it, and then 2021 it was the NFT boom, and suddenly everyone has discovered that the blockchain is a thing, and they're starting to ask questions about, hey, what's this like ideologically? What are its affordances for art? And I'm sat here going, there's an essay on that. You can read this. But the sort of, yeah, the Artist Rethinking the Blockchain has been amazing. Ruth Catlow from Furtherfield and the editors from Talk did an amazing job with it. I don't get any royalties or anything, so I can say without conflict of interest that it's an amazing physical artifact if you can afford a print copy. But otherwise, the PDF is legally and publicly available for download, and I do recommend that. And yeah, when it came out, I thought, oh, this is great. There'll be 10 books like this in a couple of years, and this will be a really fun snapshot of a particular time. And here we are several years later, and it's still the only one. I looked on Amazon yesterday to check, to see whether I was going to be wrong in saying that. And there are lots of little how-to guides for, how to make NFTs, how to make NFT art, how to trade NFT art. That's an entire sort of subgenre of self-published guides on Amazon. But no, there's nothing yet that really takes the question of blockchain seriously from a cultural point of view in the same way. So, like, I'm sort of increasingly excited to see something else do that. But in the meantime, art history thinking the blockchain is it's got some very interesting stuff in there. It's got Terra Zero's project to have a self-owning forest, which is a really nice example of sort of taking what people decided earlier this year is this horrible, environmentally destructive, governance lacking evil technology and use it to try and save the trees. I think it's got Primavera de Filippi's plantoid in there, which is an absolutely wonderful sort of self-organizing artwork that sort of takes tips from people who see it and uses that to commission human beings to make other artworks. My nightmare scenario is that sort of reaches an inflection point and takes over the entire planet. So the entire planet is covered with plantoids, and the economy exists purely to service plantoids. Fortunately, that hasn't happened yet, but it's an interesting thought experiment. And there's lots of other good stuff in there. The other thing I've got in there is a short story called Bad Shibe, which is it's set about 2032. You can date it to roughly the day if you assume that it's using Dogecoin, because there's a block number in there. And it's a sort of couple of days in the life of a young true believer in that society who wakes up one morning, sees that someone else has overtaken them on the leaderboard for their district, for how many tips they've given to people and how much crypto they've used, and sort of cascades into self-doubt from there, as in the same time enough threats of everything unraveling to keep the reader interested happen pretty much off page. And that was I described that as my exasperated love letter to the Vancouver crypto scene. But it's a theory fiction if people like that term. And if they don't, I don't know what a theory fiction is. You can't prove anything.
Nice. Yeah, there's so much to say about that. Like, it sort of reminds me of, I don't know if you ever read Four Futures by, I think it's like John Fraser, I think it was.
Sadly not. No. I was the immediate literary inspirations for it were Cory Doctorow's Down and Out in the Magic Kingdom, which takes the idea of social currency and runs with it. Lots of William Gibson, particularly there's just one moment in Neuromancer where the protagonist is walking through a space station and they encounter something they don't recognise, but the reader recognises from Gibson's description that it's Duchamp's large glass, and that just sort of that confidence in the cultural literacy of the reader really interested me. And then Michael Moorcock, the new wave science fiction writer, I'm a massive fan of his Jerry Cornelius stories and the literary style of the early ones, which were very, very cut up. They're sort of very Burroughsian cut up style, and just sort of, again, sort of trusting the reader to, even if they don't understand the references, to get the feel of what's going on. And sort of creating this world in which the what I've described as the unlikely libertarian future in which the state has collapsed but the internet still works. In a way that would sort of horrify an imagined left-wing art reader by the fact that actually the world hadn't imploded and people did have things they liked and things sort of, education and work and families continue, and horrify the sort of the imagined crypto libertarian, I guess right wing from that point of view reader, by having the sort of the world in which everything is owned and paid for and everything, and you still have school, people are still taught stuff by authority figures, and there's sort of obviously global warming going on in the background, and it was an interesting sort of challenge in producing something which would upset everyone's expectations, and sort of try and convince sort of the culture crowd that there's something to the technology, and the technology crowd that there's something to the culture.
Yeah, that's really interesting. Yeah, because I mean, what I've noticed about like going through quite a few of your essays is that you do have, I mean, you did have quite a bit of foresight into, like, especially in terms of arts, in terms of curation. I mean, curation has become like a bigger and bigger thing with the whole NFT art space, and this was something that I read essays from you that I think were like from 2015, maybe even. But so then, I'm really curious if how the space has evolved from your point of view and like what you first saw. Like, are there any like big surprises, or did it sort of unfold in kind of a way you expected, maybe?
Yes, I mean, just to undermine my credentials, NFTs took me by surprise, and I just didn't understand them at all. The It was the old Art on the Blockchain podcast with Cynthia Gates and Rhea Myers, and sort of I was listening to that, and they were talking about using Counterparty, the Bitcoin based token system to make art, and I was like, I don't understand how this works. Why would you do this? And like I'd made a little art market script on Ethereum very early on. I was just beaten to the punch by Monograph, by Kevin McCoy's awesome use of Namecoin. But yeah, I'd written a little Ethereum testnet, because Ethereum wasn't live yet, smart contract that allowed you to register the hash of an artwork and sort of buy and sell it with royalties on it. Because as an entirely personal opinion, I'm not a big fan of resale right or royalties or those kinds of encumbrances, but I knew that people would want it, so I put it in there to see how it would work. And so like I'd made this system, but I hadn't conceived of the things in it as tokens. And so seeing people making that extremely obvious and very powerful leap just caught me by surprise and took me a while to get my head around. So yeah, that's my sort of visionary credentials blown out of the water. And I was interested by how I was interested by how things developed at different paces, because once NFTs were in the mix, NFT marketplaces came very, very, very quickly afterwards. But curation, which I thought would be decentralized very soon, has taken up until now, really, to catch up. There are some awesome curatorial DAOs now who are sort of collecting art as a signal of sort of art historical or curatorial interest in it. And of course, it's done as something which will, I guess they're hoping to see a return on the art that they buy, but that's still that's a form of critique. It's a way of sort of putting your money where your mouth is. It's revealed preferences rather than stated preferences. It's not people saying, "Oh, I think this art is wonderful." It's the sort of the "would you hang it on your wall" question. Would you have it in your portfolio? And that sort of, I know to most artists, the idea of actually having to think about money as something other than the thing that you need to pay your rent and get materials at the end of each month is really regarded as somehow not the done thing. But our money comes from somewhere. Even if we are exhibiting in state-run or state-funded spaces, that money has come from somewhere, and sort of there isn't a economically or financially innocent state that we are in that the blockchain can spoil. And sort of we might as well lean into that and sort of critically engage with it in sort of practice rather than simply in performative language. So yeah, I've been really thrilled to see curatorial DAOs becoming a thing, and I'm hoping that sort of commissioning DAOs will become a thing, that sort of these blobs of capital with rules attached on the blockchain will start contacting people and saying, "Hi, can you draw me a fish, or whatever the current craze for art will be, and this will be sort of organized on chain as well. So yeah, it's because sort of around the time of art history thinking the blockchain, I was thinking in terms of blockchain as a medium. I was thinking as a means of organization, and I was thinking of it as a means of financing in the sense of paying for things rather than looking for returns. And it's interesting how little of those affordances have actually been used. If you look at the original rare pepes, which is where the sort of the rare part of NFT art comes from, that had the tokens, that had the gallery and pretty much the marketplace and a built-in currency, and the recuperation of that by the polite art world has sort of taken up most of the last few years, and it's been really interesting seeing this sort of idea of rareness, which was originally deeply ironic in rare pepes, become a serious concept which people try to work out what it means and whether something is rare or not, and object that an infinitely copyable digital image is obviously not rare. So what are you talking about? And yeah, that's the sort of Simpsons meme of that's the joke. That was the joke.
Well, have you actually? That reminds me of I don't know if you read the piece by Mackenzie Wark. I think she talked about I think it was like my collectible ass or something like that.
Yes, yeah. That's a great piece. I take that as the starting point for an essay I wrote called NFT. It's tokenization and its discontents. So I think I start with what was it? It's like, collectors like rare items, and there's nothing rarer than something that doesn't actually exist, and so we sort of go on from there.
Yeah. That's sort of, I guess that's kind of the opposite of the premise in Mackenzie Wark's piece, where it something is rare if it's been seen by everyone.
Yes. Yeah. That kind of. I mean, Mackenzie's talking about effectively positional goods there. It's something that I have and you want, but only I have, and that gives it value because it sort of gives me a status signal or a negotiable instrument, depending on how you look at it. But the social dynamics of or like sort of phrased less pretentiously, the question of the value of art. It's like, why is art worth something? And one possible answer is art is a positional good. It's something that I can have that you can't, that signals my particular status, and that sort of secures my place in a particular layer of society. And sort of it's possible for something to be more than one thing at the same time, so that certainly doesn't exhaust art. I'm a sort of a massive art and language fan. The transatlantic or international even conceptual art group from the 60s and 70s, who've still got a couple of members going today, and sort of one of the people who wrote with them was talking about the fact that what the person who buys the art sees is probably different from what the person who looks at it in the gallery sees, and that's okay. Artists got to eat. You have to get the money from somewhere, but that doesn't exhaust the possible meaning or value of the art.
So speaking about art, you had done quite a few art pieces related to blockchain, related to Bitcoin and others. And most of them were well before like this recent like NFT craze. I mean, there's some wild stuff going on with that, of course. But I'm curious, what was it like making art then at that point without having all the ERC standards that we have today? Like, I think there's ERC 721 and ERC 1155, which is like the majority of like these NFT crypto art pieces, and I think that standardization has allowed for facilitating this, extremely fast movement of capital. Particularly crypto capital, of course. But when you were doing it, you didn't have this.
Yeah. No, and sort of without wishing to be the old timer explaining how difficult it was, the kids these days don't know.
You went uphill both ways to school,
I
right?
did indeed go uphill both ways on the way to minting a token, yes, and we didn't even have tokens, and we didn't even mint them. No, so I just sort of latched on to the idea of Ethereum having sort of handcrafted some Bitcoin transactions for earlier work, and I just liked the idea of being able to program this thing and sort of be able to generally program it. But the tools at the time were kind of limited. There was a Python-like language, and there was a Lisp-like language. And I'm a programming language nerd. I love Lisp, and so I used that for some of it. And I'm also a other people should be able to read your code nerd. So the sort of various early articles that I did saying, hey, maybe we can use this for art, I did in the more Python formatted language. I think it was Serpent or something. I might be confusing the names.
Like Serpent or Viper, I think.
Yes, yeah. There's this, Vitalik has a series of snakily named languages. And it was sort of, if you look at the early stuff, I'm basically copying and pasting from the history of art, particularly conceptual art of the 60s and 70s, and net art of the 90s and 2000s, and in some places, sort of software-based generative art of the same era as net art, and saying, okay, how do we do this but on the blockchain? It's the meme. It's sort of cats but on the blockchain, car rental but on the blockchain, medical records but on the blockchain, art but on the blockchain. And so I had very definite artistic models, conceptual models, art historical models. I didn't have the code models, so I had to sort of very, very laboriously work through, how do you represent this? How do you store this? How do you secure this? And that became sort of the form of the first couple of years of art, was sort of, how do we represent this? And not as a sort of an empty question of, hey, let's play with technology and make it do strange things, although that kind of tinkering is great fun and does get us new things. It was very much sort of taking from conceptual art the idea of the withdrawal from or critique of the existing networks of exchange in art, and from net art the idea of sort of planting a flag or putting up a poster or sort of almost holding a protest in this new sort of technological space that was sort of promising great things, but also threatening great things as well, and sort of saying, "Hey, let's let's sort of almost misuse it for something that will give people something other than what it's immediately meant to be used for." And there's always a heavy layer of irony to it. So something like democratic palette, which is color, but on the blockchain. It's a little distributed application, and if you have some ether, you can go to it and sort of enter what your favorite color is, and it keeps a palette of like 8 or 12 of the most popular colors, and yay, it's democratic, anyone can vote for it. But of course you have to have the ether to do that, and you have to have the technological knowledge at that time to do that. And it's sort of a democratic shim over sort of the distribution of sort of intellectual and financial capital. So yeah, there's that kind of thing going on.
It's a limited understanding of democracy, that's for sure.
Yeah, it's a sort of, hey, let's democratize something talk from the sort of, I guess, the Californian ideology, that sort of Richard Barbrook and Andy Cameron essay from 1995, which I have the disastrous feeling my career in art has been sort of taking that as an instruction manual rather than a terrible warning. But the sort of, hey, let's democratize things, let's bring it to the people, let's improve the world talk, which is satirized so beautifully in the Silicon Valley TV show. I mean, that really is a documentary. It's very easy to deploy that language to place a curtain in front of other things, or if you're the person doing it, to resolve the contradictions in what you're doing, or to silence your conscience. And yeah, sort of, I enjoy sort of conceptually and visually pathetic work where you go to it with these great hopes and it disappoints you in a very careful way, and you can go on from there. It's sort of a lot of my work is taking, I guess, verbal descriptions of what art is, or how technology works, and sort of producing something that pattern matches that but completely disappoints the spirit of it. And that kind of sort of disobedience in obedience does have a history in art, and it's a useful way of producing competent work where people can't say, well, you've just broken this, why have you done this? It's sort of it. In the case of software art, in the case of blockchain art, it runs, and it possibly looks okay, but sort of when you get into it, it cascades into, no, hang on, this isn't what I asked for. What have you done?
Hey everyone, if you're enjoying this episode so far, be sure to subscribe, leave a review, share with a friend, and join the Cryptoleftist communities on Discord or Reddit, which you can find links to in the show notes. If you're enjoying the interview or find the content I make important, you can pitch into my efforts starting at $3 a month on patreon.com/theblockchainsocialist to help me out and join the newest patrons like Garant, Cowman, Saramansky, Miguelito Z, Jay, Justin, Jorge, Steve, Ori, and Matt. Any amount really helps since making this stuff isn't free in terms of money or time. And as you can maybe tell, I've been getting quite an increase in the number of subscribing patrons. So thank you so much for all of the new ones who have joined recently, and for all the people who have helped out since the very beginning. As a patron, you'll get a shout out on an episode like I just did, and access to Patreon exclusive contents like Q&A episodes where you can submit and vote on questions you'd like me to answer, and I'll give my thoughts in roughly 20 minutes. In the last Patreon Q&A episode, I gave a deeper look into the connections between blockchains, cooperatives, and DAOs. Secondly, I think in the near future, I will be releasing some content for patrons as sort of like a sneak peek based on the interviews that I was able to conduct during my time at the Crypto Commons gathering, which took place in Austria a couple of weeks ago. Of course, I'll still be making free content like this interview to help spread the message that blockchain does not need to be used to further entrench capitalist exploitation if we put our efforts into it. So if that message resonates with you, I hope you'll consider helping out. Also, if you're interested in what's been going on lately with the Breadchain cooperative project that I've been working on with a few others in the community, be sure to check out the latest development update of the Breadchain crowd staking protocol, which is meant to be our first application to be put into production. So that you can find on my YouTube channel. But yeah, that's it. Let's get back to the interview with Rhea. So I guess sort of maybe thinking about this thread a little bit, I'm curious to hear, we talked about it, I think, before, off of the podcast, of course, but what are your thoughts during this recent and potentially just continuing like NFT craze and like the backlash it's also received? Because I think like you mentioned before, you were one of the first artists to sort of talk about blockchain as like a type of medium for art. And then, but like, it wasn't really, I don't think it was taken that seriously. Like I personally was like quite surprised by like the thing. I remember like probably in like 2018, I mean, beforehand, like someone was showing me this like JPEG that they, piece of art piece that they had bought from some app on their phone using Ethereum. And I was like, I don't understand the point. And then just during the pandemic, all of a sudden it just exploded. Everybody seemed to have an opinion on it. It was, very, very like, emotional, I think, for some people, thinking about art as, being so intertwined with what they thought was like such a financialized space. So yeah, I'm curious what you thought about that. Because I imagine you probably got the brunt of it, maybe even.
Yeah, I was sat here thinking, I wish I'd made a lot more NFTs. I'd be much richer. Yeah, I mean, sort of the relationship between art and money is fraught. I love the book Art After Money, Money After Art by Max Haven. It mentions cryptocurrency, I think, once, and if I was going to have criticisms of cryptocurrency, then those would probably be similar to the ones that I would have. But no, that's great for sort of looking at the impact of financialization of art, sort of where art ends up as basically traded commodities that people purchase without seeing, store in free ports, and then resell, hopefully for a profit some years later. And I've sort of written essays and produced work that leans into that, and I'm working on some more of that now. But the mythology of art is that it's this good bourgeois space, free of the such dirty and inconvenient concerns as money and where the money comes from, and combining the sort of spiritual world of art with the immediate sort of the immediate sort of purchase and valuation of it. Sort of it looks like putting the cart before the horse. It's like, hey, what art is there that's available for 1 ETH or for $3,000? It's like people don't like knowing that that's how people think about art, and so I entirely understand the backlash. There's a degree of very literal scapegoating to it. My absolute favourite example of this is someone on Twitter who posted something about how awful NFT energy usage is, and then the next tweet was them posting about how their 3D printer had arrived from China. It's it's an NFT. That NFTs are at that point where enough people are doing it that you can see them and point at them, but you are probably not doing it, and so you can performatively disavow it and sort of get some calm from worrying about the environmental apocalypse that's looming in a year or three. So that's my very cynical take on it. There was absolutely a degree of moral panic about it. There's also, with the best will in the world, a tendency in left or pseudo left thought to sort of just treat all technology as reducible to the ideology or the economy that has produced it. It's the left equivalent of, oh, I see you're taking an iPhone to your anti-capitalism protest. It's sort of, oh, you're trying to use this anarcho-capitalist technology for something other than anarcho-capitalism. There's a contradiction right there. What are you going to do about it? And it's like, I'm going to learn about it and repurpose
Amen.
it.
Amen.
It's sort of it's it's like the accelerationist manifesto for an accelerationist politics, which, to be very clear, was written as a deliberate provocation, very much to frighten the horses. But the sort of whole, hey, remember that when the left used to lean into technology, we've gone from sort of we will bury you to, hey, maybe we can bake to death in the sun in a slightly more gentle way. It's sort of something of a fall from not grace but sort of ambition for the left, and seeing this sort of technology, which has such obvious ideological determinants, be so successful on its own terms, although it's being recuperated at a rate of knots. But seeing it be successful on its own terms, I think, has spooked some people. And it may be the case that technology itself is a problem, is something that needs practical critique and restructuring. But you can't do that verbally. You can't say, I'm not going to look at this. You have to. It's not sort of you have to change the system from the inside, but I believe and have believed from the start, and sort of my mission, if you like, is to convince people that there are useful resources here that you can, if you are careful, take out and use for interesting things. And back to NFTs. So I was very, very, very happy to see people getting paid for their art as an artist and someone who knows artists. Sort of getting money for your art is good. If you cannot get money for your art, then you have to be independently wealthy to make art, and that closes up not just the economy of art, but the imaginary of art as well. So everyone who wants art to be free of the distorting effects of money will probably be disappointed by the art that results only from people who have sufficient money from other sources to make it. So yeah, I was deeply relaxed about people getting paid for art, and in particular I saw so many queer and trans and sort of other minority artists getting their first ever sale of digital art from that, getting money for sort of rent, for education, for medication, for, like people who desperately within the current system need access to more operating capital or more living expenses than they have, were suddenly getting it. And it's sort of, to a cynical observer, and I am a cynical observer, it looked like the moment at which people got upset about NFTs was at the moment that people slightly further down the social status long tail started making money from it. Now, the obvious answer to that is no, they didn't. They started getting upset when people started making $70 million in return for the sort of digital file. And yeah, I know that was the driver, but so the collateral damage from that, and I'm not trying to hold up minorities as a human shield here, but society is always more complex than a soundbite. Sort of, yeah, people were starting to sort of get the benefits of NFTs distributed more evenly, and sort of that being the moment to start worrying about the environmental impact, and the environmental impact considered so incompetently, sort of, because I've been following the environmental concerns around blockchain stuff for a few years, and yeah, the sort of the person who completely miscalculated the carbon usage. That's great for the press, but it's not great for actually thinking through this technology. So I was actually kind of annoyed by that. And sort of some of the big new chains, including the one that I'm working on now, are sort of proof of stake chains. So you only have the sort of the environmental destruction of running a few servers, and at that point, that's where we're back to a more general critique of the environmental impact of technology usage. And another thing that frustrated me was seeing people going effortlessly from, oh no, it's an environmental apocalypse, when they were told it wasn't, to, oh, but the governance is terrible with proof of stake. So, it was just sort of, what's it the Americans call it? It's like a gish gallop of just like objections so that they didn't have to think about it. And
yeah, definitely. Whenever I get into arguments with a lot of these types of people, it just seems like you're like, okay, you may have won that point, but this is another reason why it's bad, why you should never use it.
Yes, I'm determined not to have to think about this, and that's fine. Let other people think about it, maybe. Yeah. And to be absolutely clear, I like planet Earth. I enjoy living here. I have kids. I'd like them to be able to live here. Sort of, with apologies to any inhumanist philosophers or anything listening to this, the biosphere is kind of important to us, and anything that sort of fucks that up is probably bad. But sort of failure to look at the details of where the energy comes from, where the energy is coming from, what the replacements for using energy are, is deeply incurious, and sort of I think it's worth looking at the sort of attitude or the spirit that leads to that. But yeah, I sort of I occasionally sort of sit here and sort of make sure that I'm running the most efficient systems that I can. So yeah, and just to sort of, again, to lean into the governance discussion, the early the early work I was doing, it's sort of the first couple of years, it was sort of pairings of aesthetic properties with systems of governance. And I was doing it so long that the RC 721 standard came out just as I was finishing. So I changed one of the last ones to be token grid. So it's a a modernist painting style grid of horizontal and vertical lines, and you can change it in the contract if you own one of the tokens, and anybody can just ask for one of the tokens. But and sort of that was tied very much to the number of energy companies I'd heard from who were like, hey, we want to do something on the blockchain. And so it's like the idea of an energy grid, modernist grid, sort of controlling and capitalizing that. So yeah, I sort of, it was interesting sort of working on this long enough that things got standardized, as you said earlier. But yeah, we were sort of those of us sort of both critically and practically engaged with blockchain stuff were engaged with questions of governance from the start. And blockchain, Bitcoin is a governance technology. It's something which removes sort of distorting social intrusion from transactions between individuals and sort of makes it very, very difficult to do anything different. So I guess it's maybe anti-governance, but yeah, the question of who gets to say how things work was embodied there from the start. And sort of another, sort of whilst I'm listing my frustrations, another frustration is sort of critics or philosophers suddenly coming up with the start of debates that were being held very, very richly in the blockchain space from the start. The sort of reproduction of internal critique as external critique. It's like, yeah, I know that you could do on-chain governance. Have you read all of the work on that and the pros and cons of it? So yeah, that's interesting, sort of seeing people from their point of view arrive suddenly, and from sort of the blockchain world's point of view, suddenly need to catch up, which sounds arrogant, but I'm fed up enough with people sort of saying, hey, have you thought of this? With the answer being, yes, I have. Many people have. Would you like to hear about it? But I mean, again, that said, sort of the number of fresh eyes and voices that have come into the space over the last year has been spectacular. Getting sort of more proper art historians actually looking at this and going, hey, there's something here, and sort of seeing more old school technoculture critics looking at it and not just simply reeing about it has been absolutely wonderful. And yeah, to sort of close the, what do I think of the NFT boon and its discontents. It's like, I think it's absolutely great. I am deeply, deeply happy that people are getting paid. I'm deeply, deeply happy that people are thinking about curation and paying for this work and how it interacts with the existing world of off-chain rights. Sort of, we're seeing really interesting work being done and really interesting questions arising about how this interacts with copyright and moral rights and all the sort of off-chain bourgeois state property model things that blockchain was originally designed to discard almost all of in a libertarian way. And yeah, sort of people trying to escape escape some of the restrictions of that world, but at the same time keep some of the sort of reputational and value effects of that world, even as they seek to flee it. So, yeah, I must make clear that I'm offering no opinions on this here, because I'm not a lawyer and I'm involved in industry, and my opinions are strictly neutral. But just as a hey, look over here, things are interesting kind of thing. Yeah, the way that questions of clashes or contention between off-chain and on-chain property rights and the form that property takes, seeing those being played out in the arena, the theatre of art, is something that I hoped for from the start. Because sort of my pitch to the tech people was, hey, art is this place that you can experiment with people in without it being like people's medical records or a nation's food supply or anything. And sort of seeing these difficult and necessary questions being hashed out by artists and sort of activist lawyers and corporate lawyers in the art space is brilliant, because it is now people's livelihood in the art world, as I was saying earlier. But it's it's a sort of safer space to do that. And so,
yeah, I think there's so much there. Like, I feel like just the artist crowd tends to be a little bit more left wing generally.
yes, yeah,
And I think it caused this huge clash of like, of different value systems. Really, I mean, you had the
yes,
sort of maybe apolitical, maybe right leaning tech people who were just trying to find new places to put their money, and then
yeah,
all of a sudden these left wing artists are sort of come to
yes,
this very new technology that they don't know very much about, but hey, they can make a lot of money and they need to pay for stuff. And maybe their peers saw it, who are also maybe part of this left wing milieu, and sort of like, well, don't you know that's really bad? And it was sort of like primed from the start, I feel like, to make it difficult to be on the left. I mean, partially due to fairly those concerns about environment, of course, that of course everybody is worried about, but nobody can really solve individually.
yes. Yeah, yes. The oil industry have been very successful in pushing the idea of individual carbon footprints. Yeah, I mean, sort of to be entirely fair, Bitcoin was designed to solve a specific technical problem, which was there as part of a specific financial problem, which was there as part of a specific political problem. So everyone who says Bitcoin is a political technology is absolutely right. It's a fantastically successful political technology. Unless we fetishize technology in some really interesting ways, that cannot possibly exhaust the value of it. There has to be some surplus value to it. Bitcoin does very, very, very deliberately exclude some avenues for justice as conceived of by some sectors of the left. You cannot, at the moment of transaction, intervene and attempt to act in the good of a third party. You cannot attempt to redistribute wealth at that moment. You cannot attempt to protect foolish artists from making bad decisions. You can't prevent transactions being sent to really, really, really horrible people. So, as a kind of exclusion of politics at this chosen moment, it's a very, very definite kind of politics. That kind of politics has been claimed by libertarianism, by right libertarianism, but I think it's an anarchist moment in general. It's the absence of a state or a functional equivalent of it, and to simply cede that to the right because they've licked it seems like a really bad idea.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, it's like to me, what just kind of is frustrating is that I feel like the left sort of take Bitcoin too literally, if that makes sense.
Yes.
Like as if that's like the only potential way. Like they don't. I think they're just missing sort of the forest for the trees when it's like, I got into arguments with someone like, oh no, like you can't use Bitcoin. There's only 21 million of them. That we can't use cryptocurrency. There's only 21 million Bitcoin. And like all it is a matter of like changing a variable. Like you can. Like I agree a bit that Bitcoin has some sort of like right libertarian tendencies within the code itself, but like it's given us a template to change a couple of variables to reflect the values that we would like to reflect.
Definitely, and there are I won't name them because it wouldn't be fair, but there are definitely some negative case studies in tweaking the design parameters with the best of intent, and then the unintended consequences of that. to get back to shilling my own work, Blockchain Poetics has a section warning people sort of if you tweak the parameters, make very, very sure you understand what each one does, because it's very easy to sort of add a feature which we think is great, or change things in a way that looks more efficient or more just or more fun, and the sort of the Jenga tower of the sort of bricolage of Bitcoin's original assemblage from all these disparate materials falls apart. It just falls apart. So yeah, I think in order to be able to perform that kind of very, very delicate neurosurgery on Bitcoin, you really, really need to understand both the technology and the ideological motivation and expected results from that, and the unintended consequences that have happened since. I mean, Bitcoin mining is the perfect example. It's a paper clipper, the thought experiment of the AI, which is tasked with doing one thing, and that one thing is making paper clips, so it just turns the entire planet into paper clips. And yeah, Bitcoin's difficulty targeting algorithm will perfectly happily boil the oceans if that's what it takes to secure the chain. Sort of that's not up for debate. That is how the game ends if we don't do something other than mine Bitcoin, and I strongly suspect that we will continue to do something other than mine Bitcoin. But
it's mining Bitcoin with like the current energy mix that we have in the world.
Yeah. And sort of the sort of ignoring any obvious bugs in the code, things like the role of exchanges in centralization, the emergence of mining pools, the perverse incentives of on-chain governance when it's structured in the wrong way. These are all things that sort of Satoshi, whoever they were, whatever they were, wherever they were, just like there's no way that you can foresee these consequences. But if you're going to try and change the system now, then the system that the software is embedded in now consists of these concerns. And I mean, sort of, yeah, Bitcoin's an interesting case just in terms of anyone really, really, really could mine it at the start. It really did have that sort of openness that it promised to, but people didn't know it was there. So you have sort of this first mover, early adopter advantage, where people who started out mining Bitcoin when you can do it on a CPU or a GPU or a milk crate rig of GPUs, for them, Bitcoin is the thing that gave them financial freedom, that they can pursue whatever they want. And that, I think, that skews their view of the liberatory potential of cryptocurrency, because, it's liberated them. Why can't it do it for everyone? And the answer is, we can't afford to mine. So like our world is kind of different. So yeah, sort of everyone who says, Bitcoin is concentrated with early adopters has something going on there. I think if we could solve that problem, then we would be more than a quarter of the way to being able to abolish capitalism in general. But that's a valid objection.
I think it's a valid critique of Bitcoin, but I think it's also, it's clearly a valid critique of capitalism in general. Like,
yes.
The first countries who we us in the West, we have like a first mover advantage into capitalism, and now at the moment the rest of like the third world is getting they have the shitty end of the stick.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, sort of a small, rainy, muddy corner of a continent suddenly inventing better clocks and bigger whips, and then going to far more civilized and structured kingdoms and stealing all their young people and gold is sort of, you wouldn't be able to do that if you weren't the first mover in that space, definitely.
In the capitalism space. If they had just invested in capitalism earlier, then maybe they'd be.
I know, right? It's why didn't they do that? Honestly, it's an interesting one because obviously Bitcoin is anarcho-capitalist, so sort of saying, hey, let's use this inherently capitalist dynamic technology to produce a form of socialism. There's your opening contradiction right there. But even with that as the layer, sort of if we wish to create, the sort of the first blossomings of socialism, I guess, sort of within a currently capitalist society, then blockchain has shaken things up a bit.
At the very least.
It hasn't been entirely recuperated yet. I almost had a mental breakdown the first time I saw a cryptocurrency credit card. I was like, these things are opposite. Talk about dialectic. It's like I could not have made a more ironic dialectical artwork than someone producing a Bitcoin Visa card.
It's a very cursed synthesis.
It is, and I can't get one because I'm in Canada, and you can only get them in America. But yeah, I mean, you can we can start with the world as it is. We don't have to fall into merely prefigurative LARPing with that. We can do sort of more than simply reformist good and strategy within this sort of it's no longer a temporary autonomous zone. I mean, it's not this space beyond the immediate understanding of the existing bourgeois political order, but there's remnants that the background radiation of it is still shining brighter than it will. So yeah, I think there's definitely things that people either should grab and run with, or should take as like a sort of a negative example and say, okay, this is possible, but I don't want to do this, so what should I be doing instead?
Yeah, I think it's just about like not discounting the lessons already learned, even especially, I mean, if it doesn't follow your politics. I mean, it doesn't one bad experiment.
Yeah, I mean, it's trivial to coherently reject cryptocurrency or blockchain politically. I mean, like, if you believe in the sort of the inherent dignity of work, then the kind of mining and inhuman activity of hashing of extending the blockchain, that's anathema. There's no way you can humanize that. And so, yeah, you can reject that. There are so many coherent grounds on which to reject this technology, and that's great. But with the best will in the world, things are not always going as well as they could. So if this isn't the different thing that we want to try, then sort of let's look at what worked about it, what didn't, how it flew under the radar to make itself so successful at the start. Whose egos it flattered, whose balance sheets it appealed to, and see if that can be used in different ways.
So I actually really wanted to quickly touch on what I think is one of probably like my favorite pieces that I saw that you had wrote, because I think it really sort of like forms a bit. It sort of showed that I have the community r/Cryptoleftists on Reddit, and I feel like you were probably the first prominent crypto leftist that was out there, especially in this piece that you wrote for Furtherfield, where you were exploring different sort of like explicitly left-wing use cases called Crypto 2.0 and DAWCs, or Decentralized Autonomous Worker Councils, which was written in 2015. So this was like really, really, really the beginning, I think, maybe even either right after or right before the DAO. The original one was out there. But yeah, I'm curious, could you maybe explain a bit that idea? I think listeners may be really interested in that, and sort of what was it like during that time?
Yeah. So if we take the view of different kinds of leftism, so like a Soviet style state, or a more anarchic view, sort of somewhere along that false dichotomy axis, you find the sort of memeplex of anarcho-syndicalism or of workers' councils or of liberal communism. And I know you're all sort of grabbing your phones or your earpods and saying, no, that's not right, but like work with me here. So the sort of kinds of socialism, of communism, where you are organized around a workplace or a project and it is democratically controlled. You vote on the direction of the work and on any pricing or any interactions with the outside world. You vote on a delegate who you send to like a town assembly, and then the town assembly votes on a delegate who they send to a regional assembly, and then the regional assembly votes on people they send to sort of, if we're really doing communism properly, an international assembly or, some larger scale assembly. And the representatives can be recalled at any time. So, if as soon as they start trying to vote themselves a pay rise or ultimate power, then the people who've delegated them can simply recall them, and they have to report back to the sort of lower level group. So it's sort of generalized cooperatives in some way, and I live in a housing cooperative, so I have some trivial experience of the joys and woes of cooperatives. And this system of organisation is great because it's an answer to, so how do you organise things if everybody is just free to do what they want? And it's like, well, you get together with other people who are free to do what they want as free individuals, and then sort of, if you have common interests, then you organise around it. And once it's no longer two people arguing, you organise it, as democratically as you can. And that sort of democratic ownership of the means of production is socialism, from some very strong descriptions of it. Now, I am, as I may have mentioned earlier, deeply cynical. The absolute worst description I can provide of political economy is the question of what to do with sociopaths. After the revolution, we will still have people for whom it is economically rational to not work within the system. Sort of establishing full communism will not resolve human nature in any of the ways it's been proposed. So where you have different workers' councils, different workplaces, different regions with competing interests, and they will have competing interests, you then fall immediately back into the requirements of copyright, of property law of some kind, of contract law of some kind, and of the regulation of conflict in a way that doesn't render it structureless in the sense of the tyranny of structurelessness essay. And sort of, without wishing to be someone who has a hammer and this looks like a nail, I think some form of cryptographic commitment with a public record that cannot be falsified or added to unilaterally might be a technology that's useful for this. I think that where the workplace or the governance structure is distributed, a DAO-like structure might be a good way of distributing that control and of, for want of a better word, securing it, structuring it, in sort of governing it in various interesting ways. I could be completely wrong about this. I'd be very happy if someone said, you are completely wrong about this. Here is a much better system. That would, I'm not lying when I say that would make my day. However, at a time when people were sort of saying, oh wow, this is this horrible anti-socialist technology. Oh, why are you doing anything with this? I was like, if we think a few steps ahead, then, this may solve what look like some problems in socialist organisation at either at scale or over time. And like, I know people involved in very seriously in cooperatives and alternative forms of organisation, and I'm absolutely not trying to put down the amazing work that they've done. I want to take that amazing work, run with it, scale it, and give them some time off. And like that, yeah, that was written either before or around the time of the DAO, the original DAO. Bad Shibe was written immediately before the DAO hack, and one of the big bads in that is kind of a DAO hack kind of thing. Seeing things like the like this was on the Ethereum testnet, but like the People's Republic of Doug or Pro Doug, which was a very early DAO prototype, was amazing. And sort of DAOs have bubbled under the surface for a bit, but sort of things like the sort of Moloch DAO of a couple of years ago sort of reignited that spark. And the work that the Koala organization, COALA, are doing in terms of their model law for DAOs, so that you can incorporate a DAO into local bourgeois state law, and then your DAO is sort of legal anywhere that's legal, is amazing. And then taking some of the existing DAO code and structuring it to work with that's mind-blowing to me. That's really amazing. And I've paged out my DAO knowledge, so unfortunately I can't name check any other good projects. But yeah, seeing DAOs come back is filling my heart with joy, and seeing them used for curation and sort of other forms of organization is great, because again, curation is sort of something that does pay sort of workers who are artists their wages, or the money they live on, but it's a good space to play in, and then sort of take the models from there and apply them to sort of healthcare or graphic design or whatever sort of people regard as more important than art.
So just to say that, like, I think the idea is really, really interesting. Decentralized autonomous worker councils, and I'm all for it, of course. Like I was messaging with one of my friends. He was, we're like, we need to start like a worker DAO, just
Yes.
worker council DAO. And what's really interesting about this space is, I mean, only like very recently, I was invited into this Twitter space, where you can like sort of talk to people over Twitter on your phone, because the question that people were asking is, are DAOs socialists? So you have all of these like, DAO tech people who worked in big tech, probably, who come from other types of big corporations, and who were, they took the plunge, and they're totally sold on crypto and DAOs, and they've left their well-paying jobs, and so therefore they're able to take the risk, and they're now working on DAOs. And then all of a sudden they started working on it, and they realized, oh wow, are we doing socialism? Or like, the way we're democratizing our like work a little bit, to a certain extent, maybe. Like, is this socialism? Of course, during the talk, I mean, it was a very civil talk. It was I had a lot to say, because I think some people didn't understand what socialism was. The short answer is DAOs are not socialist, but maybe you can design them in a way that's more socialistic. But it is really interesting to see this happen organically. I mean, the left is not involved in this space at all, and here you have all of these people are coming to socialism some way. And if there was like a coherent left-wing organization in the blockchain space, then like, maybe they could have their answers questioned more readily, or their questions answered more readily for that. So that's why I like the pieces. This is 5 years into the past, and or 5 years into the future, and now these questions are being asked.
Yeah. Yes, yeah. I mean, because DAOs were originally decentralized autonomous corporations, but I think
lots of ideology there.
The lawyers pointed out that claiming something's a corporation may sort of give you particular liabilities, so they became DAOs, which is a more fun name. Yeah, I mean, DAOs tend to be organized as joint stock corporations, and like whilst we're talking about reclaiming stuff from the right for the left, Mencius Moldbug's patchwork ideas, which will either horrify whoever you mention them to or cause you to be horrified by the enthusiasm you see when you mention them to people, is a thought experiment in, what if we organised the state as a joint stock company? And that sort of, let's turn this to 11 kind of thinking is so useful, even when the outcome is absolutely antithetical to anything you would want to see, because obviously, we have forms of organisation for a state other than a joint stock company, and sort of any, but sort of any ability to think of this as possible, or to think through the consequences of organisation in that way, that sort of gives us resources we didn't previously have, or that sort of jolts us off of the sort of the rail that we were on onto, at the very least, a different rail, it is useful. And sort of, to be extremely clear, I'm not endorsing neocameralism in any way, shape, or form here. But sort of as with Bitcoin, these thought experiments can go somewhere, and it's worth digging into them. And with I think a lot of my work is written in exasperation, I guess, and the DAWCs one certainly was. And there's obviously other ways of organising, and so the early, as I said, the early art was very much different ways of organising access or allocation of a resource, and sort of it bemuses me that people aren't willing to experiment, to sketch out different ways of doing things. And you can object that you're sort of doing this in a playground where that the hashing power is centralized around capital, or the staking power is centralized around capital, but it is throughout society. We're back to the, you're taking your iPhone to a protest.
Yeah. How do you even get around that when capitalism is so totalizing?
Yeah, I mean, if you're, if we're not assuming a sudden violent revolution, then you have to bootstrap somewhere, and this is a current and rapidly shrinking, but current source of difference that we can sort of at least think through.
Mm-hmm. So I'm curious to hear, do you think DAOCs, decentralized autonomous worker councils, are still positive, and are they still possible? Yes. And are you still, are you overall optimistic still about the technology and how it will develop in the coming years?
Yeah. So I think DAOCs are possible. Some other people have done work on very similar things, which with massive apologies, I can't remember the name of. I know that Furtherfield have looked at various different options. So apologies for that. So sort of other people are working on it. I think it's absolutely possible. I think that on a merely technological level, as we see more and more DAO toolkits and better established case law for DAOs, it'll become an option that you can pick up. It's like you can go to the library and photocopy the flyers for the protest. You can go onto the blockchain and organize a temporary, distribution system for fares to the protest, and so that kind of thing. So I think those affordances are absolutely there to be taken up and used. And if people try it out and it's not what they want, and they come up with something better because of it, then sort of DAWCs being possible is, it becomes a relatively small question. I would like to believe that engagement with this imaginary, engagement with this technology, engagement with these ideas is still possible. And I'd like to think that it sort of becomes something other than a way of paying rent, not only on your house, but on the cups in your cupboard in your house. Because that would definitely be the worst possible outcome from something that was originally designed to remove, third parties from your life. But no, I'm in the medium term, I'm very, very optimistic about the technology in terms of seeing people use it for organisation and funding, and sort of in the longer term, sort of, capital just sort of recuperates everything, and the state legislates everything, and it will become sort of in many ways the worst outcome would be it just becoming a boring part of our lives that go on as before.
Right.
But on the way to that, I think there's still some energy there.
Yeah, I think the part of the reason why people are hopeful about DAOs is because it gives a bit of a spark of like an alternative future than
Absolutely,
sort of what
yes.
we're careening towards the some sort of dystopia.
Yes. Yeah, and sort of, but Bad Shibe was an attempt to convince myself that, however unlikely that future is that imaginary future, to steal another Richard Barbrook title, is possible, however strange it might look. And yeah, we need to be able to imagine a better future. I think that's like an excellent slogan for the left, and one that needs reclaiming. We need to be able to imagine a better future. We need to be able to make a better future, very certainly, but to make it, we need to be able to imagine it.
Yeah, absolutely. Maybe to finish off the interview, first off, thanks a lot for your time. I mean, I could talk probably for hours longer, but I know you have plenty of other things to do. It was super interesting to get your perspective, and to hear about what it was like starting in the beginning back in the day, and your thoughts on art and about politics, of course, are very interesting. But maybe to end it off, you can let people know where they can keep up with you and keep up with your work.
Yes. So my website is rhea.art. That's RHEA.art. I'm on Twitter as Rheaplex. That's RHEAPLEX. And the website has links to my essays on Furtherfield, which is where sort of most of the sustained writing about blockchain art is, but there's also various essays on the site. And if you don't look at anything else, do please look at Artists Rethinking the Blockchain. It's a great resource.
Cool. Yeah, I'll include it in the description.
Thank you.